Hi, I'm John Rennie from Boneyard Pictures. Thanks for joining me. In this episode, I want to talk about the career of the independent legend filmmaker George A. Romero. If you are a regular here on the Boneyard, you'll know that I've talked about Romero before, as he is a filmmaker I've always found to be inspiring as he shows us that hard work can really pay off if you are a struggling artist working in film.
We would tell people, we're going to make a movie. Oh yeah, in Pittsburgh? Give me a break over here. That was it. Everyone struggled through it. Everyone stuck with it. None of the actors quit on us. I mean, you know, there were no protections going either way, contracts or anything like that. We were just a bunch of people that were getting together and making a movie. And, you know, it was all beg, borrow, and steal, real guerrilla stuff.
Romero himself struggled for many years through interesting micro-budget failures, such as There's Always Vanilla.
You can't pick a girl up off the street and tell her her father's a bag of hot air and that she has a fat ass. I want an apology.
Jack's Wife and The Crazies, but also had independent triumphs, such as the entertaining, financially successful, and visually stunning Creepshow. And Knightriders, a rare non-horror film from Romero's back catalogue. But thanks to reissues on DVD and Blu-ray, Knightriders is finally finding its audience and is cherished by Romero's hardcore fan base the world over.
Knightriders. The knight is a fighting machine, noble to the death.
Romero came from nothing, being an art student at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, to creating his own company in the filmmaking business and building a cherished canon of work that he left behind after his death in 2017. His work is praised for its influence and its fierce originality.
It's just a costume.
His debut film, Night of the Living Dead, landing its place almost immediately in the Museum of Modern Art, and his zombie and horror works finding places in the hearts of millions of devoted Romero fans. Love or hate his work, the filmmaker had an undeniable influence that helped shape the world of horror as we fans know and love it today.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Stop it! You're ignorant.
Romero worked hard his whole career, endlessly plugging away to make a name for himself in the feature film business. At a young age, Romero had seen Powell and Pressburger's 1951 movie, The Tales of Hoffman, and he realized that he had an understanding of the medium because he could identify the low-budget techniques that Powell and Pressburger had used to achieve a high level of storytelling and craft in that movie on a budget.
It was unique. I mean, it was something that I sat there at that time and tried to figure out how it was done. Tearing the doll apart when Coppelius tears her apart, and you could see. And on some prints, you can still see the black. They just sort of covered parts of her in black and the leg sticking out through a curtain. As sophisticated as it is, it has this sort of innocent approach as far as the technical approach that he took to it. He took sort of the simplest way and said, I'll try that.
This understanding of their techniques made Romero realize that he could do this too, and he set off to achieve his dream and realize his passion to be a journeyman filmmaker, beginning his filmmaking odyssey as only Romero could by sticking it to the man and being arrested when filming an early attempt at a movie, The Man from the Meteor.
The development where I lived in a MetLife development in the Bronx called Parkchester. And I wanted to make a movie called The Man from the Meteor. I shot this movie and I had to throw a flaming dummy off the roof. Essential, you know, it's production value. And that's really when I started. I never finished any of those films, you know. But anyway, I got arrested by the Parkchester police for doing that.
After working in industrial film, news, editing, and commercials,
The fibers are covered with this stuff.
Oh, this box has never been opened.
Add the Calgon.
Romero, John Russo, Russell Striner, and Carl and Marilyn Eastman all pitched in and helped raise independent funding for a feature film project, and Romero co-wrote and directed the low-budget classic, Night of the Living Dead. Unfortunately, the film suffered a botched release due to the team of young filmmakers' lack of industry experience and a simple mistake of losing a copyright bug on all important documents after a change of the film's title meant that the film almost immediately slipped into the public domain and lost the filmmakers a lot of money over the years.
We didn't know what to call it. I don't remember who suggested it, but we came up with Night of the Flesh Eaters. And so when we got a distributor, Walter Reed, they said, wait a minute, this is, we can't do this, because there was this movie, The Flesh Eaters, so we can't use The Flesh Eaters. We were, again, these amateur filmmakers. We had put our little copyright notice, the C with the circle around it, on the title, on Night of the Flesh Eaters, C with the copy. When they changed the title to Night of the Living Dead, they took off Night of the Flesh Eaters. In taking that off, they took off the copyright. And when they put on Night of the Living Dead, they didn't reinstate a copyright because they didn't, nobody noticed that the copyright notice had come on.
After releasing Night of the Living Dead, things got very tough for Romero over the next few years. He went into large amounts of debt to make his next few films, but never gave up. And then fate intervened when he met and then teamed up with a young TV producer, Richard P. Rubenstein.
In the case of There's Always Vanilla and Jack's Wife, my strongest recollections of those films is just not having the money or the time to be able to really do what I wanted to do. After Night of the Living Dead, the disappointment of doing 3 films that sort of nobody saw was immense. It was at one of the early screenings of The Crazies that I met Richard Rubenstein, and that's sort of when we started to do things, professionally.
The two went on to make a small production company, a logo which all Romero fans came to know and love on those grainy VHS tapes, a Laurel production.
I think that we tend to operate in more European style in terms of the way we produce and the way George directs. I see my function as a producer in terms of providing George Romero with a brush, palette, and canvas. And his creative control is absolute.
Romero's next run of films, produced with Rubenstein, would all go on to have a great shelf life, and are still influencing horror fans, film students, and independent filmmakers today. This impressive list of credits includes the vampire-influenced work Martin.
My name is Martin. I'm 84 years old. The only way I can survive is by drinking blood.
The now classic zombie adventure flick, Dawn of the Dead. The Romero fan favorite, Knightriders, starring a young Ed Harris in his first leading role. The EC horror comic influenced Stephen King collaboration, Creepshow. One of my all-time personal favorite movies, the grisly zombie apocalypse film, Day of the Dead.
With no radio contact, they'll come looking for us.
I said shut up!
With all of these classics under his belt, you would think that Romero was moving on up the food chain and fast, but throughout all of these works, Romero only made a living on a modest salary coming from Laurel, without any residuals or benefits, or even being in the Writers or Directors Guilds, and the company remained pretty small, even after securing distribution deals with Salah Hassanein of the United Film Distribution Company. After the unfortunate box office disappointment of Day of the Dead, Rubenstein made the decision that Laurel should cash in on the fame of Creepshow and move on into television. Eventually, Laurel made this move very successfully, creating the Tales from the Dark Side series. There is, unseen by most, an underworld, a dark side, which came from the anthology style of Creepshow and employed Romero's first assistant director, John Harrison, to direct some great episodes, and makeup effects artist Tom Savini, who also directed episodes, and Michael Gornick, who's Romero's director of photography on many of his best films, also directed for the show. Even though all the Pittsburgh film moguls and his friends were going the same way into television and branching out with Laurel, Romero was never a filmmaker who followed others blindly, and as usual, decided to carve out his own path and career.
My partner and I, at the time, Richard Rubenstein, had a company called Laurel Entertainment. He sort of spearheaded a move to take that company public. But because it was public, we needed to sort of get more diverse with what we were doing. And so he wanted to do more television. I didn't want to be trapped in that kind of situation.
Romero did not want to direct or write for television and took a step back in the company, staying on for a few years as a partner and returning as a writer on certain projects such as adapting Stephen King stories for the Laurel feature film production of Creepshow 2, which was directed by Michael Gornick.
How you doing, lady? Thanks. Thanks for the ride.
Other Stephen King projects also went into development at Laurel, with a planned version of Pet Sematary that Romero would direct and would have distribution from Paramount Studios. And Laurel was also in talks with Stephen King to have Romero adapt his mammoth book about the battle between good and evil, The Stand. This went as far as Romero editing a script that was penned by Stephen King himself, and Romero began helping to bring down the budget, which was reported to have been an estimated $40 million. King and Romero were sure working together they could get this budget way down by working with up-and-coming or no-name actors. As these King adaptations were in development at Laurel, Romero was out on his own for the first time in his career and looking for work. As fate would have it, a friend of Romero's, producer Gerald S. Pionessa, got in touch with a job offer to write and direct an adaptation of Englishman Michael Stewart's book, Monkey Shines, about a killer monkey that through drug experimentation begins to share man's taste for hate and revenge.
You have got to get smart on this, sugar.
This is the only time that I've ever adapted someone else's work, other than Stephen King. Tried to stay true to what the original author, Michael Stewart, was trying to say.
Nice toss.
Basically, it's kind of a love story between the monkey and this guy, but it's basically two sides of him. He's Dr. Jekyll and the monkey is Mr. Hyde.
Monkey Shines was a negative pickup, meaning that the film would be bought on completion by a studio for an agreed upon price, as long as the product was completed on time, budget, and schedule. And that studio was Orion Pictures. This was it. Romero was going to move on up into the big leagues, writing, directing a Hollywood movie with a massive crew, a famous producer whose name was almost royalty, professional actors in Jason Begay, Kate McNeil and John Pankow, and a decent-sized budget. Tom Savini was brought on board to do the Monkey Shines effects and animatronics. Romero regular Pascal Buba was brought on to edit, and a lot of the crew were local friends, as Romero was still filming in and around Pittsburgh. Apart from a few problems dealing with the real-life monkeys, the shoot went very well, but then Hollywood came in to take a big bite out of all that happiness.
No, it's getting really hard for independents. I mean, the market is getting smaller and smaller. And it's just like hamburger joints. I mean, there's no more mom and pop places around. And if you don't have, 2,000 prints out there on Friday the 13th, it's very hard to become a player.
Monkey Shines was Romero's first taste of real studio filmmaking, dealing with producers and unions. The film was also shown to test audiences who took a disliking to Romero's original Creepshow-like ending, which apparently, according to the filmmaker himself, used stylized lighting cues in which the evil Dean Burbage, played with an evil mustache-twizzling glee by Stephen Root, carries on the harmful research into monkey mind-altering drugs at the end of the movie. But the audience wanted a happy ending, so instead we got Jason Begay's character walking again, and a Carrie-like jump scare with a monkey bursting from inside a human body during an operation.
I had when we shot Monkey Shines, I thought I had a terrific ending for that movie.
Yeah.
Mike Medavoice, who was head of the studio at the time, said, "Oh yeah, you want to use your ending? I'll open your movie in flight."
Wow.
And that, quote. And so, this is the stuff that I've run up against.
One of the most disappointing things about the whole reshoot of the ending was that going over schedule meant that Rubinstein went on ahead with Pet Sematary without Romero, as he said Laurel couldn't wait. And that's understandable, but so regrettable. Stephen King's Pet Sematary was directed by Mary Lambert, and has gained a huge cult following over the years. It's appreciated by many King fans, I have to say myself included, and is still bearing fruit, having a recent remake and a sequel this year starring David Duchovny of the X-Files fame.
I held him the day he came into this world, and I'm gonna hold him the day he goes out.
I'm not one to look back at what we missed too much, but I would really have loved to see George Romero's Pet Sematary.
May the Lord bless you and keep you.
Shortly after this, Romero, Rubinstein and Laurel would part ways for good. Rubinstein went on to make Stephen King's The Stand for television with the equally excellent director Mick Garris, and I have to say I do love that version. It has a special place in my heart. But again, who knows what might have been if we had George Romero's and Stephen King's The Stand, but I guess we'll never know. But like I say, it's no good dwelling on that kind of stuff. We've got to be positive. And on the positive side of things, in 1990, the producers associated with the original 1968 film Night of the Living Dead, John Russo and Russell Streiner, wanted to try and make some money again after the disappointment of being stung with the release of the original film. They had already tried this once when they released a colorized version of the film with Hal Roach Studios to try and make some money in the late 1980s. Many of us have seen that film, and I think most of us figure that it just didn't quite work out for the film or for the investors.
They're coming for you, Barbara. They're coming for you. Look, there comes one of them now.
But this time, the Pittsburgh-based film moguls asked Romero to script a remake of the film, and Romero agreed, although he has gone on record as saying that, as with the colorized version, he was reluctant to do it because he felt like he was repeating himself. But of course, he went along to try and make him, his business colleagues, and friends some money.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
And as an added bonus, his friend and creative partner Tom Savini was getting his first chance to direct a feature film with Night of the Living Dead 1990. So of course, Romero went along for the ride.
Here, it's the same original story with lots of twists and turns, and characters do different things and have different roles. I have to remind people and re-establish what death means in the very beginning of the film somehow. Still working on that. I got some great ideas.
In the same year, Romero teamed up once again with Dario Argento to make a two-part anthology film, Two Evil Eyes, based on the works of Edgar Allan Poe.
Dario called me up one day down there and he said, "George, I am Dario." So, and he said, "I want to make a movie with Poe. You make one, I make one, and we make one movie from two."
Argento was trying to break into the American market, and originally this project was to have included shorter segments from directors Wes Craven of The Hills Have Eyes fame and John Carpenter, who directed Halloween. But these filmmakers had to drop out, leaving Romero and Argento to make it a two-piece. This is a very somber film, and I find that Romero's segment is bitter but beautiful, with a fantastic central performance from Adrienne Barbeau.
I married a rich, old man. I let him use me, for pleasure and for show.
It lacks his usual sense of humor. It's a very bleak film, but one that has its place in Romero's canon as an interesting dive into short films, as with his earlier works, like The Amusement Park.
I'm going outside. You won't like it.
It feels like Romero was doing his friend Argento a favor on this one. But Tom Savini's work is once again the highlight of the film, and if you are in the mood for a dark and disturbing evening with a fantastic leading woman, then this one is for you.
I guess what attracted me to Valdemar was The Living Dead, you know. And I just thought it was a pretty cool story.
While the Night of the Living Dead remake was in full swing, Romero had read his friend and collaborator's new novel, Stephen King's The Dark Half, and thought it was a great story and approached King about securing the rights to make the movie. This went very smoothly, and Romero went back to Orion Pictures, who had released Monkey Shines because he said they were the only guys he knew, and asked them if they would produce the film with him as director, and King being the most popular author in the world, of course they agreed.
I think partly Orion said yes because the new administration, I think, maybe felt badly about the failure of Monkey Shines and their failure.
Things progressed very quickly, and in the course of a few months, Romero wrote a screenplay remaining very faithful to the source material. Romero then sent the work to King for approval, and he signed off on it.
I wrote it, and I sent it to him to read, and he approved it, basically, but that's basically all he did, and he didn't object to anything, so I said, cool.
Regrettably, I can't find anything out there about how King felt about the adaptation, only to say that he must have liked it because he signed off on it. And this is a shame. I'd love to know his thoughts on Romero's adaptation, because apart from a very brief but memorable voice cameo in Diary of the Dead over a decade later,
These are the end times, and for the sinner there will be no end. Get on your knees, get on your knees, get on your f***ing knees.
The Dark Half would be the last time that these two titans of horror would work together. And I've always thought that this was a real shame, as the two complemented each other so perfectly on Creepshow. In commentary of The Dark Half, Romero seems to talk fondly about the years he and King were friends and collaborators, and seems to miss his friendship with King very deeply. But as the old saying goes, we'll always have Creepshow in The Dark Half.
I mean, we've been in contact, we email each other once in a while, but, you know, I miss him, actually. I love the guy, and had a wonderful time working with him, or every time that I did work with him. And
Romero's adaptation of Stephen King's The Dark Half is a movie that has gone down as a great-looking, well-polished studio movie for Romero, but also a disappointing start to the rest of his Hollywood career.
Thad Beaumont has a secret. I know all about it. A piece of himself he keeps hidden.
The Dark Half was filled with production problems, but as usual, Romero talks about them in his typical jovial kind of way. For starters, the exact same thing happened with The Dark Half that had happened on Monkey Shines. Test audiences were shown a version with a tacked-on ending that didn't yet have completed special effects work. So what they saw was basically a half-finished, overlaid effect.
all they basically had in the temporary version that they showed to this preview audience was a crane going up without an explanation. But anyway, Orion said, forget the crane, forget all of that. Let's have the birds take them apart.
In my humble opinion, even this tacked-on effect was better than the actual ending we got. So as with Monkey Shines, the studio said, well, we need a new ending, George. And to make matters worse, while Romero was shooting the new ending in 1991, Orion Pictures put a sudden halt on production as they almost went bankrupt and had to go into a protective Chapter 11 to protect the company from going completely under. Romero and crew were kept on staff throughout this, and eventually the production was given some money to complete the film, and it was released 2 years later in 1993.
Based upon a book by Stephen King comes George A. Romero's masterful vision of a nightmare come true, The Dark Half.
Orion really put all their hopes behind The Dark Half, praying it would save the company, with big names like Stephen King, Oscar-winning actor Timothy Hutton in the lead role.
I've written about slime before, Clausen, but none of it as low to the ground as you.
And Romero was director, but the film tanked and fell into obscurity for a few years, as did Orion Pictures.
They were in trouble. We didn't realize this, that they were in serious financial trouble. They were basically on their way out.
The two most harrowing stories behind the making of The Dark Half are that of Romero's relationships with his director of photography, Tony Pierce Roberts, who seemed to have totally disrespected him as a creative collaborator and director, and Romero's now infamous clashing with the method acting style of actor Timothy Hutton.
When he was playing George Stark, everyone on the crew had to call him George. I mean, we couldn't call him Tim. When he was George Stark, we had to call him George, or he would snarl at you. I mean, unbelievable. Once we both realized that we were each trying to do the best we could, we wound up really getting along. I think he improved my work because he was demanding.
In his earlier works, Romero had been the author of all of his own work. His crew followed his direction.
I see my function as a producer, providing George Romero with a brush, palette, and canvas. His creative control is absolute.
And that is why I think we have these magnificent earlier films which shows the true soul of Romero and contain his more left political leanings.
They can be tricked into being good little girls and boys, the same way we were tricked into it, on the promise of some reward to come.
He made movies with a clear style, a director's vision and a message. But now he was working with union crews and egos. Tony Pierce Roberts even went as far as to call the studio behind Romero's back over an argument.
Oh, I don't think
so. To whether a house should have the lights on, even though there's nobody living in it, to make the picture look prettier. And the studio took Roberts' side over Romero's as a director. This must have been a humiliating experience from what sounds like a crew member whose ego was just a little bit too big for the project's own good. But every story has two sides, and I've never heard Tony Roberts talk about the dark half. So take from this what you will.
I tell you, I never had a worse relationship with a direct DP ever. But we had real problems. I mean, and I think it was really, that was the whole thing. It was all sensibility.
If it's one thing I've learned from film study, it's that the best movies always have a clear artistic vision from the director. One filmmaker must lead the project. Tony Pierce Roberts' insolence and disagreeing and going behind Romero's back to me is just like me saying to my boss, I'm not teaching the syllabus today. I'm going to teach the students something completely different. If I did that, I'd get the sack. Filmmaking is about respect among crews, and I think it seems that there was a lack of it in this relationship. Romero is, by all accounts, a mild-mannered pleasure to work with from all that speak about him.
George wants to have a family atmosphere on every one of his films, and that is what he wants. He can't stand tensions. He can't stand political problems, which is, I think, one of the main reasons he doesn't want to deal with Hollywood.
And I think in this case, his easygoing style and filmmaking process may have let him down, as he wanted to avoid confrontation. Some people in this world are just out for number one, I guess, and all else be damned. And I really think that was the case here, with these strained relationships on the dark half.
You know what? It's one of the only films that I can watch of mine, one of my only films that I can watch and actually still get involved in the story, because I'm not disturbed by errors that I made. I think it's the best crafted film that I ever did.
What the dark half did successfully do was show Hollywood that George Romero, the man who produces it, once considered that B-movie, gory horror zombie guy who makes movies in Pittsburgh, could actually write and direct a high-class feature. And the dark half is certainly that. For all of his faults, I say again, it's a very accomplished work of direction that Romero himself actually considers one of his best-looking works. I've always found Romero's Hollywood films, Monkey Shines and The Dark Half, to be his least personal films, and they lack that kinetic energy of his earlier works. When Romero was in charge and not wrestling with collaborators' egos, his works are just better. That's all there is to it.
It's a joy working with George because he accepts a lot of input in terms of what I see, or, it's amazing. There's even suggestions that come oftentimes from crew members. A lot of his film is input from the crew. There's a lot of freedom. It's a real democracy with George.
He is a filmmaker that thrives in the independent world because it affords him more control over his work. And as the author of his own films, Romero makes his most successful movies.
I still believe that a filmmaker left alone should be the author of the film. I don't like committees. I don't like people interfering. I don't like people making decisions for you. We take the blame anyway. It's like, somebody says, all right, here, do this. And you take the blame for it, even though it wasn't your decision.
After these two studio films, we should have had Romero's golden age, working with big budgets and A-list actors. But instead, what began was the most financially successful and yet creatively redundant era of Romero's career. He would not shoot another movie for the next 7 years after The Dark Half.
My partner and I had all these adventures in Hollywood. We were involved with so many productions, The Mummy, Goosebumps, big deal movies, Before I Wake, all the stuff that never happened.
However, over these last 7 years, there would be 3 projects that Romero would rewrite, have greenlit, and then have pulled out from underneath him. These were The Mummy, which was to be a remake of the 1932 version of the film, and was said to have had a $12 million budget at Universal.
What became of The Mummy of Imhotep?
But yet another Hollywood crapshoot happened, and with just 6 days left on his contract at MGM on his 5-year development deal before I Wake, Universal said they could not step on MGM's toes and cancelled the project with Romero. 6 days that ruined 5 years of work.
Cut!
Before I Wake was then also cancelled, even though Romero had managed to get interest from Oscar-winning actress Meryl Streep to star in the film.
We were lucky enough to have Meryl Streep agree to do a role in a little film that we were trying to promote. And they said, Meryl Streep is Yesterday's Pizza. And that's what they said. And Yesterday's Pizza is still being nominated for Oscars this year.
And lastly, Romero's other movie that was developed that sounded like a treat for the senses would have been Diamond Head, a heavy metal musical that was rumored to have been a Rocky Horror style musical extravaganza. Asia Argento was set to star.
Oh, you were checking me out?
An artist as diverse as Marilyn Manson, David Bowie, and one of my all-time favorite performers, Ozzy Osbourne,
Rock and roll!
were rumored to have been approached for cameo roles. This, to me, sounds a bit like a piece of heaven that we never got to see.
Unbelievable.
After deals falling through at New Line Cinema, after painstaking development and rewrites that went on, Romero and Grunwald had had enough of Hollywood. The two picked up their latest pitching project, Bruiser, which was to go on to star Jason Flemyng and Peter Stormare, and took it to Canada. And Romero finally went back into production, independently financing the last few films of his career in Canada, where he lived out the rest of his days until his death.
Thank you all. I've been here for 5 years now, and I love it. I've found a crew of people that I'd like to work with. This is where I'm going to stay. Thank you all.
Romero's final works are all interesting to say the least, but he found it frustrating that the only movies producers wanted to make with him were the Dead sequels.
Don't mess with Texas.
And the last few are often dismissed by fans as way below the standard of Romero's original Dead trilogy.
Don't!
There's no way out.
Will one of you give me some more bullets for this gun?
But these movies have got their own merits, and for me, that's just a whole other story.
Zombies, man. They creep me out.
Toward the end of his life, Romero was always thankful for being able to make himself a career in the movies. It was his dream come true. But in his last few interviews and career talks, you can hear that there was something that his time in Hollywood took away from Romero.
It's a mean-spirited market that is mostly controlled by people still that have no affection or affinity for not only this genre, but for movies in general. It's a way to make money.
He never seemed as free-spirited or the cool, relaxed filmmaker that he was after Hollywood in the days of Martin, Dawn of the Dead, Creepshow, and Day of the Dead. Personally, I think a little bit of Hollywood cynicism crept into Romero's soul and stole a little bit of what made him great in the first place. His love of beating the system and using his sheer creativity and authoritative voice to put his message out there in the world with his movies.
People have written about these films and say, well, if you really look deep underneath, you'll find these things. And I don't think they're deep underneath at all. They're sort of right there in your face, right up front. But first and foremost, these are horror movies. They're thrillers. Horror, fantasy has always been a way to, get your views through. They're parables.
Romero's canon of work is incredible to say the least. And he will forever be remembered as an independent spirit that shook the pillars of Hollywood from the outside and showed us all as aspiring artists that you can make movies too. You can be anything you want to be. But once he stepped inside, he wasn't one of us anymore. And for that short time, before he joined us outsiders again, I think Romero truly saw the dark half of working for the man in Hollywood.
But I don't think it's insecurity to say that I'm not sure how this is going to work out, so I'm going to shoot it another way. I mean, that's just exploration. There's a lot of film is like watercolor. There's a lot of accidents, and it's learning how to control the accidents, and that's where you just need to keep doing a lot of work.
Thanks for watching this video on the not-so-Hollywood career of director George Romero. If you'd like to see more films from me about Romero and other filmmakers, please remember to like and subscribe. Leave your thoughts on Romero's work in the comments, because I'd love to talk about his work. And as always, thank you all so much for listening.